our desires, our conflicts. What's behind it all?
Yeah, we're digging into René Girard. He was this brilliant French-born thinker, historian, critic, philosopher based in the U.S., lived 1923 to 2015, and his ideas, seriously groundbreaking, got him into the Académie Française, which is a huge deal. His work really does give you these, like, aha moments. It can change how you see culture, history, even just, how you interact with people every day.
Absolutely. So our mission here is to unpack Girard's big idea, mimetic theory. We'll start with desire, which isn't what you probably think it is. Then we'll get into the, frankly, pretty unsettling idea of scapegoating. And finally, how ancient texts, especially the Judeo-Christian scriptures, apparently reveal these dynamics in a unique way. The goal isn't, an audio textbook. It's to help you grasp these really complex ideas quickly. Why societies form, why fights escalate, what being human is all about. Okay, so let's start right there with desire. We usually think, I want that thing. Simple, right? Spontaneous. But Girard throws a curveball. He says that's not really how it works.
Exactly. His core concept is mimetic desire. Mimesis, like imitation. The idea is our desires aren't just aimed at an object. They're according to another. They're borrowed, you could say, from a model or a mediator.
Borrowed, so like a triangle. Me, the thing I want, and someone else who wants it first.
Precisely. You see the model wanting the object, and that spark makes you want it. It's less about the object itself and more about the desire of the other person.
Right, so it's not just I want that, it's, oh, they want that. Maybe I want that too. Like when everyone suddenly wants the same phone or gets into the same weird hobby. The sources mention Don Quixote, how he's the model for Sancho Panza wanting some imaginary island.
Yeah, that's a classic literary example. Sancho doesn't just dream up the island, he wants it because his admired model, Quixote, talks about it. Or think about Stendhal's The Red and the Black. There's a character, Julien Sorel, who literally pays someone to pretend to desire a woman.
Wait, he pays someone?
Yeah, just to display that desire in front of another woman, Matilda, hoping she'll imitate it. It shows how, as Girard puts it, a little desire is enough to arouse desire in the creature of vanity. It completely flips our usual idea of desire just coming from within ourselves, Desire, according to oneself.
Okay, so if we're all borrowing desires from each other, especially from people we're kind of close to or similar to, what happens then?
Well, that's where it gets complicated. That shared desire, Girard says, inevitably leads to mimetic rivalry. You start competing for the same object, the same status, whatever it is the model made desirable. And the strange thing is, the more we compete with them, the more we resemble them. We become mirror images through the conflict.
That sounds intense and potentially pretty destructive.
It often is. Rivalry can easily sour into hatred. Girard has this insight. The person who hates first hates himself for the secret admiration concealed by his hatred. The model, the person you once admired, suddenly becomes an obstacle, the enemy.
You see that everywhere, don't you? Office politics, academic squabbles.
Absolutely. Proust called it snobism. Girard points out it happens across all sorts of professions, professors, doctors, even servants in Proust's work, competing intensely over often abstract things. It can even become a desire for nothingness, where the rivalry itself is the point, not even the original objects, just this destructive spiral.
And the scary part is how unconscious this often is.
Right.
Like we don't even realize we're imitating or competing in this way.
Very often, yes. Girard believed great novelists, Cervantes, Flaubert, Stendhal, Dostoevsky, they intuitively understood and depicted this mimetic truth, even if their characters or even the readers initially don't see it.
Proust is mentioned again. His earlier book, Jean Saintoy, apparently shows Proust himself not quite getting his own mimetic desires.
Right. Girard suggests Proust was initially unaware, but later, in Search of Lost Time, the La Recherche, he achieved this profound, superior knowledge about desire. Deeper, Girard thought, than even Freud's theories.
So if Proust had to figure it out, what hope is there for the rest of us? It sounds deeply embedded.
It seems to be. Dostoevsky, for Girard, explores the really dark side of this, what he calls deviated transcendency. It's like someone gets so fixated on their rival, their mediator, that they lose themselves completely. It's a giddy descent, a blind plunge into the shadows.
A plunge that ends where?
In Infernal Pride, Girard says, this obsession becomes this whirlwind of increasing velocity and narrowing circumference, total self-destruction fueled by mimetic obsession.
Wow. And this ties back to Freud. Girard thought Freud missed something fundamental with the Oedipus complex.
Yeah, Girard felt Freud focused too much on the father figure and the specific taboo, missing the underlying mimetic dynamic or the rivalry itself, which could involve anyone as a mediator, not just the father. Even things like masochism or sadism, Girard saw them as part of this triangular desire, wanting closeness to the mediator or reacting against them. It's all interconnected through mimesis.
Okay, so this mimetic rivalry, if it keeps escalating, what happens to a group, a society, when everyone's caught up in it?
That leads to what Girard termed the crisis of undifferentiation, basically social meltdown. All the distinctions that hold society together, roles, hierarchies, differences, they start to blur and dissolve in the heat of universal rivalry. Everyone becomes a rival, everyone becomes the same, and chaos threatens.
Like in Greek tragedies, the examples given are Eteocles and Polynices, brothers killing each other.
Exactly. Or Dionysus and Pentheus. Girard notes how, in these myths, violence invariably effaces the differences between antagonists. They become monstrous mirror images of each other. He argues there's really no innocent, harmless mimesis. Even rituals that imitate conflict can spill over into the real thing if things get out of hand.
So society's on the brink of collapse. How does it pull back? How does order return?
Through something dramatic and disturbing. Girard calls it the victimage mechanism, the scapegoat mechanism. Suddenly, all the accumulated hatred, fear, and rivalry finds a single target. An individual or a small group becomes the focus of everyone's aggression.
A scapegoat, someone to blame for everything.
Yes. And their expulsion, or often their death, miraculously restores peace. The collective violence releases the tension, but the community can't really explain why peace returned, so they attribute supernatural power to the victim.
Power. But they just killed them.
Both kinds of power. They see the victim as the source of the chaos, the all-powerful force for evil, but also, paradoxically, as the source of the peace, the all-powerful force for good. This dual omnipotence, this contradictory sacredness, is the birth of the archaic sacred, according to Girard.
The example from Ephesus. They killed a beggar during a plague, and the plague supposedly ended. So the beggar became both cursed and sacred.
That's the kind of event Girard points to. The collective murder is perceived as having miraculous effects, solidifying the victim's paradoxical status. It's a really foundational moment for the community.
A foundational moment built on collective murder. That's a heavy idea. And then rituals and rules emerge from that to keep the peace.
Exactly. Rituals, especially blood sacrifice, become ways to reenact that original saving violence in a controlled way. They're more or less faithful copies of the liberating mechanism, designed to periodically release tension and reunify the community.
Wow. So rituals aren't just symbolic. They're meant to actually do something, to replicate that first scapegoating event.
That's the argument. Some archaic rituals even involved mock crises, deliberate insults, taunting, even physical blows to kind of stir up the mimetic tension before channeling it onto the ritual victim.
And prohibitions, rules against incest or grabbing things.
They rise alongside ritual. They're designed to prevent the kinds of mimetic conflict over partners, over possessions that led to the original crisis. They try to preempt the rivalries.
So culture itself, rituals, rules, maybe even things like language and symbolic thought, might have roots in managing this cycle of mimetic desire and violence.
That's the implication. Girard suggests this whole process, intensifying rivalry channeled through the scapegoat, could have played a role in early human development, maybe even influencing things like brain size or longer childhoods, as societies needed more complex ways to handle these dynamics.
Okay, this is huge. If this mechanism is so foundational, so hidden, how do we ever break free? This brings us to the next big part of Girard's theory, doesn't it? The Judeo-Christian scriptures.
Right. This is where Girard makes perhaps his most controversial and maybe most profound claim. He argues that these texts represent a fundamental break, a unique shift in human consciousness.
How so? What's different about them compared to, say, ancient myths?
Girard says myths typically tell the story from the perspective of the persecuting crowd. They justify the violence or conceal the victim's innocence. The victim is guilty or somehow responsible for the crisis they resolve. But the Bible, Girard argues, consistently reverses the verdict of the crowd. It takes the side of the victim.
It says the victim was innocent and the crowd was wrong.
Exactly. It proclaims the victim's innocence and exposes the mob's guilt. Girard insists this perspective isn't just different, it happens to be true. It reveals and upsets the violent scapegoating mechanism that myths tend to hide or endorse.
Can we see examples of that in the Bible? You mentioned Cain and Abel earlier.
Yes, that's the first murder. It leads to cultural development. Cain builds a city, but the text itself clearly condemns the murder. It sides with Abel, the victim. That's different from a myth that might subtly justify the founding violence.
And Joseph, his brothers persecute him.
A classic case of collective persecution. Girard points out how the text inverts the relationship. Joseph is innocent, the brothers are guilty. Think about the false accusation by Potiphar's wife. Unlike, say, Oedipus, who is guilty of the things he's accused of, Joseph is explicitly shown to be innocent of that accusation. The text protects the victim.
Okay, I see the pattern. What about the New Testament examples? John the Baptist.
That's a powerful example of mimetic contagion. Salome dances, Herod makes a rash promise, and then Herodias, through Salome, channels the crowd's desire into a demand for John's head. Girard says Herodias perverts the ritual function, maybe hinting at ritual sacrifice back into raw collective victimization. Everyone gets swept up in Salome's apparent desire, manipulated by Herodias.
And Peter denying Jesus. How does mimesis fit in there?
The servant girl starts it. Girard says she imitates herself in order to be imitated by the crowd. She makes the accusation, others pick it up, and suddenly Peter is trapped by the mimetic pressure of the group. Mimicry once more, as Girard puts it.
Which leads us to Jesus himself. Girard calls him the scapegoat par excellence.
Why? Because he's presented as completely innocent. The most arbitrary of victims, because he's also the least violent. There's no ambiguity, no hint that he deserved it, unlike victims in many myths.
So when Nietzsche said God is dead, Girard reads that differently, not just atheism, but something about us.
Exactly. Girard interprets Nietzsche's phrase as meaning, we killed him. He connects it to the foundational violence, the founding murder that underpins archaic societies and their sacred systems. The crucifixion in this reading isn't just tragic, it's the ultimate revelation. It exposes the mechanism itself.
How does it expose it?
By showing the victim's absolute innocence and the crowd's contagious, baseless violence, the Gospels provide this realistic and mimetic description of the Passion, which, Girard believes, stops the victimizing mechanisms working by revealing their absurdity. The cross becomes the supreme scandal, not just because God suffers, but because it unveils the founding mechanism of all worldly prestige, all forms of sacredness, showing it's built on excluding and sacrificing innocent victims.
Like the quote about the stone which the builders rejected.
Precisely. Luke 20.1 and 10 at 18. Christ is revealed as that rejected stone, the founding victim, who has now become the cornerstone, exposing the whole violent structure.
Okay, if this revelation is so powerful, what are the consequences? Does it stop scapegoating?
Not automatically, but Girard argues it makes all forms of mythologizing impossible in the long run. Once the mechanism is exposed, it's harder to create myths that successfully hide the victim's innocence. That's why, he suggests, our modern world, deeply influenced by this revelation, has fewer and fewer myths, in the classical sense, and more texts bearing on persecution, stories focused on victims and injustice.
That leads to that paradox you mentioned earlier about modern skeptics being unknowingly Christian.
Yeah, it's a striking point. People who reject traditional religion often fiercely champion the cause of victims. Girard says they could not be more Christian than they are in that respect because this defense of victims is right at the core of Christianity. The underlying message is relentless. Our scapegoats are nothing but innocent victims, and the guilty ones are the murderers of scapegoats. That idea has profoundly shaped Western morality, whether people acknowledge its roots or not.
So if the Gospels reveal the problem, the logic of violence, do they also offer the solution?
Yes, Girard argues they present a superior logic, the logic of nonviolence. It's not just about avoiding violence, it's about actively choosing love. Love, he says, abolishes differences positively by recognizing shared humanity, whereas violence abolishes them destructively. Love is the true demystifying power because it gives the victims back their humanity.
So when Jesus says, love your enemies, expecting nothing in return, that's the key.
For Girard, absolutely. It's the radical break from the cycle of revenge and rivalry. It's about stepping outside that metaphysical closure, that trap of mimetic conflict. And he insists this isn't some naive pie-in-the-sky ideal. He sees it as completely realistic, the only viable path beyond the endless tit-for-tat of violence. It envisions everything required to truly move past those destructive cycles.
We still see violence, scapegoating, rivalry everywhere.
Yeah.
If the revelation happened, why are we still so often blind?
That's the difficult part. Girard acknowledged this ongoing blindness. Modern thinkers might even rediscover bits of the mechanism without seeing the whole picture or its origins. And there's the irony, he points out. Sometimes the gospel itself gets condemned in the name of charity, perhaps because people misunderstand it or react against misuses of it throughout history. He also critiqued how historical Christianity sometimes fell back into a sacrificial reading, essentially putting a veil of sacrifice back over the text, obscuring the core nonviolent revelation.
It's a constant struggle then. We have the insight, but acting on it is another matter.
Seems so. Girard emphasizes that violence isn't an irresistible instinct. It's a pattern, a mechanism, but one we can choose to resist. And now, with ultimate violence, nuclear weapons, total war at our fingertips, the stakes are higher than ever. The choice to resist mimetic reprisals, to forgive, becomes absolutely critical for survival.
Which brings it right back to us, doesn't it? What does all this mean for you listening right now?
We've covered a lot today. This deep dive went into Girard's ideas about how desire isn't really ours, how scapegoating built our cultures in secret, and how a revelation within the Judeo-Christian tradition claims to expose all of that and offer a different path.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Girard noted that our modern world often feels adrift, skeptical, maybe even nihilistic. Yet at the same time, humanity is becoming more interconnected than ever, the grouping of the whole of mankind into a single society. If our old ways of managing conflict through hidden violence are being exposed, and if we need to think on a truly human scale now, maybe understanding these deep hidden dynamics of desire, rivalry, and violence isn't just academic. Maybe it's essential. What does it mean to really face our history, abandon old illusions, not just political ones, but the deep-seated illusion of our own autonomous desires, and choose a path based not on concealed violence, but on the difficult reality of nonviolence? What does that look like in your life, in our world? Something to think about. Until next time on The Deep Dive.